I'm probably not ever going to be fully prepared to explain what I've learned in a way that makes a whole lot of sense, and in a way that lets you understand the whole thing, because first of all, it's pretty complicated. I'm gonna do my best to simplify it so that anyone can understand it, but I'll probably misspeak in some places, and I'll probably say something that's wrong, or can be not really disproven but argued by someone else, because a lot of the things that we believe are law are just philosophies, and a lot of philosophies are argued by different philosophers, and there's a science of law and there's a philosophy of law, and sometimes these things clash. So I'm just going to put my best effort forward to explain to you what I've learned and what it means in this system of government that we have now. Now we have a lot of information that comes from England, but England was a monarchy. So we have to take that and sort of apply it to this republic that we're in. And so I'm going to explain to you what this all boils down to is my explanation of positive law and how that plays into jurisdiction, and how all these things sort of come together. They're either linear or circular, in that they keep going around and around, or it just moves across. I haven't figured out which it is quite yet. But so in our system of law, and in all systems of law, you first have a natural law. And this is what we call is lawful or de jure. My E got wiped off. De jure, okay? So de jure means it comes from the bottom up. In this system, in a republic, it comes from the bottom up. People will argue about whether or not this is a democracy or a republic. So when I read the very old encyclopedias, there's only 3 forms of government, but there's different ways that they're carried out. So you have a government where one person rules, and that's a monarchy. Okay, you have a government where a group of people rule, and that's called an aristocracy. And you have a government where all the people rule, and that's called a democracy. And a republic is how those people put that person in charge. So we have all the people get to vote, which is a democracy, and they vote for representatives, which is a group, which is a aristocracy. So the Congress is kind of like an aristocracy. And then you have a president who's over the military, which then that's sort of like a monarchy. But then you have all the states that created the federal government. And so that's another sort of aristocracy to build a president as a commander-in-chief, so then he's a monarchy. But really what we have is either a government of totalitarianism or authoritarianism, because none of them are doing what they're supposed to do. The states are not doing what they're supposed to do. The Congress is not doing what they're supposed to do. And the president is not doing what he's supposed to do. And the people have been going to public schools that are ran by these idiots. And so they don't know what their rights are and where they stand in society, and eventually where we stand in the world, because our dollars go everywhere. So from the bottom up, where all the people rule, is a democracy. But we we show that through a republic. Okay, so when the power comes from the bottom, it's natural because every person born is born free. Okay, every person on earth, every person in the universe, every being in the universe, every animal is born free. And then they choose how to bind themselves. This is how they choose to bind themselves. We chose to bind ourselves to our states, which chose to bind itself to its constitution. Okay, and then what Congress actually does is something completely different. So under the natural law, we have all the laws come from God. I put God's laws, but it's your creator. Whoever your creator is, that's where your set of morals and your reason and your thought processes, your belief systems come from, okay? And you're usually taught by your parents. Okay, so there's one thing that the natural law can't do, and that's injure. It can injure no man, okay? That's like the one rule. It can injure no man. And we've heard Ron Paul say this repeatedly: do no harm. The golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It does not require force or individual consent because every man has free will. And when I say man, I mean mankind, so that includes women and all races. If you're a human being on earth, a man or a woman, then you have free will. And you're not required to consent to anything. Okay, so these people who made the state are called one people by some writers. I was going to put writers, by the one people. Not we the people. We the people are over here. Okay, so what we created was a state, and then the state created the we the people. So the one people created the state, and the states created the we the people. Okay, so we, all of us, are not we the people, we are one people. We, one people, cannot all together consent to anything. We won't ever agree on one thing. We're all individuals, and so what we did was we created a state. Okay, because you can't force someone, because that would be an injury. So you can't force someone to be in this system. Okay, the Constitution, under the Constitution, you can't force people to be in that. And right now we're seeing that this has been torn apart, shredded really, and the Congress is really over here doing these bad things. Okay, this is a good government, but when it starts acting like a bad government, it's moving over here. This is a bad government. Under the laws of nations, governments are supposed to be good governments. They're supposed to come up with things that are in harmony with the natural law, so that people are never forced and they're never injured. As long as this is in harmony with this, then this won't happen. Okay, this is the bad. This is our created government. And this is the good, okay? So this should be good also, okay? This cannot do injuries and this cannot do harm. So when they tell you have to get a vaccine, they've gone over here, okay? They're not here anymore, they've gone over here. I'm gonna explain all this to you, okay? So natural laws are law and equity, okay? We see equity in the Declaration of Independence when it talks about all men are created equal. The law is this law, the natural law, okay? Natural law. A legal thing is something different. And the Constitution says law and equity, okay? And it uses the uppercase law. When it uses the uppercase law, it's talking about this. In harmony, because you can't ask someone to do something that's impossible. Man cannot be compelled to do the impossible. Man cannot be compelled to injure himself against his will. So getting a vaccine, if you don't want one, is a use of force, and that moves the government from a good government required by the law of nation to a bad government, a tyrannical government, unlawful but legalized. So when bad things are said to be good things but don't conform to the natural law, they're legalized, like a license to kill. Okay? Now, we do issue licenses to kill called commission. We commission officers when we need to, but only in defense with a C. DEFENCE, not DEFENSE, which is how they write it now. So DEFENCE goes back to the old French language, which comes from Norse, which means to fortify, which is also mentioned in de Vattel's Law of Nations. Defense is what a good government does. It fortifies itself to protect its people, the one people. So these people, we the people, under the Constitution, who take an oath to protect and defend it, who give up all their rights except for the 10 Bill of Rights, as per their oath, are protecting the one people in their natural state, doing their natural things, not causing injury. They do it. This is in the Bible too. It's Romans 14, where it says to let the, I think it's the ministers, take vengeance for you, because that way you can stay clean of conscience and you can get into heaven. Okay, that's basically what the Bible's saying. It's in the 1611 and the 1599 version of the Holy Bible. Okay, so that's what this was supposed to do. It was supposed to defend you in your defense by fortifying. Okay, by fortifying. Now, defense with an S means vengeance, and you're not supposed to take vengeance. Okay, it says let them take vengeance, but our Constitution never gave them the power to take vengeance with an defense with an S, which is vengeance. It's Latin for vengeance. Okay, so defense with an S is Latin for vengeance, and defense with a C is Old French for fortification. And that's what our Constitution says, defense with a C. So it's fortifying to keep you free. Okay, this is the law for all natural persons, and this comes from whoever your creator is. And then the sovereign, the one people are the sovereign. Okay? The one people are the sovereign, and this is important to understand, because the further you get over here, the more sovereignty they claim. And the worse they are, the more sovereignty they claim to have, when they actually have none here and very little here. So the one people who are the sovereigns created the state, because remember, it comes from the bottom up. All the people, all the population of the area, they created the state. Okay? They gave the state a little bit of power, and then the states got together and created the federal government. Okay? They sent people to write the Constitution, which was supposed to be an addition to the Articles of Confederation. Okay, because it says a more perfect union. So you would have to have a union to begin with to then make it more perfect. So the Articles of Confederation was the perfect union. The Constitution was the more perfect union for defense with the C purposes. Okay, now the Constitution conforms to the natural law. Okay, because it says law and equity. Equity is in the Declaration of Independence. Law is the natural law, and it's what's lawful. It's de jure. It comes from the people. So the Constitution's created by the people, but not the one people, but the states. Okay, it comes from the bottom up. Now, the Constitution, because it's conforming to the natural law, is called a positive law, and it's got to be political. The Constitution is political. It's a political status. It's a political standing. It's a situation of being part of politics. Okay, so I have Encyclopedia of Law 1891, and this is the law section, and it's all about the positive law. Okay, so my papers are a little bit out of order. So the positive laws are jurisprudence. Juris means an expert or writer of law, a lawyer or a judge. So the jurists are the lawyers or judges. So when the Constitution says that you have the right to your being heard in court, it's talking about political peers. The jurists are the political peers, okay? And the jurists in Article 3, the judiciary, are your political peers, okay? Jurisprudence is the science of positive law. The present article will attempt to present simply the leading principles and conclusions of jurisprudence. Let's see. They will resemble each other in this, that they reveal on examination certain rules of conduct. So the Constitution has rules of conduct. They have powers. They have jurisdictions. Jurisdictions are what powers each department has. So the Congress has certain powers, the president has certain powers, and the judiciary has certain powers. Okay? These powers are the positive laws. They're the jurisdictions. Okay? Now, rules of conduct in accordance with which the relations of the members inter se are governed. So members, we the people, are the members of the body politic, who are the departments under the Constitution that follow the Constitution, and all their legislation is made positive because when it's made positive, it conforms to the Constitution. Okay, so it's not that complicated, okay? So when Congress makes a law, they're going to say whether or not the law conforms to the Constitution. If it does, it's positive. If it's not, they're over here, they're being unlawful. This law, they're being unlawful. They're acting outside their office in a legal capacity, making things legalized. Okay? So we can tell the difference between a positive law and a tyrannical, fictional, improper, immoral, negative law, because the positive law citation is required on the face of the law. So when you go to look at the public laws, the public acts, the acts of Congress, for it to be a constitution, conform to the Constitution, it has to have a positive law citation. This law has been made positive and may be cited as if it does not have that, it's, I'm going to say some phrases here. It's not positive. It's arbitrary. Okay? It's tyrannical, improper, immoral, and it's creates a fictional jurisdiction. Okay? A fictional jurisdiction. A fictional jurisdiction requires individual consent. It requires you to act either by an expression or an implication. Okay? So by that, it means either you showed up in court and you implied your consent, or you signed it. In Latin, it's called fictio juris, and it's described as being false or more false than true. Okay, that's what this old dictionary that I found, the way it described it was, it's not true, it's false, or it's more false than true. So it may have some truth to it, so it may look like a law, but it's not a law, or it's could have been a law, but they didn't pass it into positive law, or they did some other legal lawyer attorney kind of BS to make it look like something that's real, but it's not. So there's no injury to a man because it has to conform to the Constitution. To be a law, to be lawful, which is the highest, has to conform to nature, because you can't ask man to do something that's impossible. That's an ancient maxim. It goes back thousands of years. You can't ask someone to do something that's impossible. So that Dr. Kevorkian, who was helping people quietly pass at their own will, at their own time, when they were most likely going to pass eventually, they put him in prison, but then they want you to get a vaccine causing possibly an injury to yourself. They want you to gamble with your own health and your own life, which is requiring you to do something against your will that may possibly injure you. So here, already two natural laws it goes against. Equity, it goes against. Law, it goes against. The right to be free goes against. Okay, let me give an example here. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a French philosopher. He lived fairly recently, and he had a book out, and he's written a lot of stuff on political philosophy. But the one thing he said that really stood out to me was that if you're born free and your government guarantees your freedom by limiting itself and its members, then how can it force you to conscript yourself into a military, not for defense with a C, but defense with an S, against your will? If you're forced to fight a war that you don't believe in, then you're not free. Okay? So the whole idea that a government that protects freedom can then force you to do something against your will means that it's not really protecting your freedom. Okay? So it goes against do no harm by conscripting you. It's the conscription, or the draft, goes against the natural law. Okay? Now, these people originally were supposed to be natural persons, and they may have a legal identity for some purposes, but when you start moving over here, they're just legal persons. Okay, so like the commissioned officers who are required to go out and maybe do bad things to protect this, which they agree to, then they become a person for that purpose, and their natural person is unharmed. So find an old dictionary. You can find them online. The 1611 one is a good one, and look up Romans 14, and it describes this to you, the one that can do the bad stuff so that you don't have to. Okay, and that's what the military is there for. Okay, so when you move over here, you're moving over here to these persons who do these bad things and they never get in trouble for it because their actions are legalized, and they're injuring this, and then they're also injuring this through their actions, but they don't ever go to jail because their behavior's been legalized, or at least appears to be legalized, even if it's really not legalized, because it's not actually. A lot of what government does is not positive law. Something that they say is that, and we've heard people like Ron Paul and others talk about how the tyrannical people will tell you that you have to follow the laws, that they're the laws even when they're not, and that it's a true jurisdiction even when it's not. So these members here, the we the people, the members, are the inter se. Okay, inter se means between themselves. So the Constitution is a group of people who are in Congress, who are the president, and who are the judiciary, who are inter se. We the people are inter se. They're the members. They're among themselves. Okay? The Constitution is, in the Bill of Rights, is for the members. And the members have to comply with the positive law. Okay? So even the members cannot be asked to act outside of positive law. We saw recently the new Congress said a prayer, and they said all men and all women, and everybody's talking about what morons they are. And all men means, and so let it be, or there it's done. And then they added all women, like it meant a man and a woman, or a men, several men. So their grammar doesn't even make sense. A men and a woman, or a woman. Okay, so I wouldn't expect the new Congress to understand this, but you can understand this now. Okay, these have, the Constitution has laid out certain jurisdictions. Jurisdictions are the powers and authorities, the things that they can do. That's what I was going to say earlier. The things that they can do for themselves, inter se, their members, their own members, apply to them, apply to members. They have an oath. And they're promised, they are promised, the members are promised a Bill of Rights. That makes sense. Okay, don't just have thoughts. Think about this. You're not a part of the Constitution because you don't have an oath, you're not holding an office. Okay? So you don't have a Bill of Rights. You have all your natural rights, all the ones God gave you. Napolitano has touched on this, and he may have even just out and out said it. He's supposed to have a book that was going to come out in September of 2020. It hasn't come out yet, as far as I can tell, and I've been looking for it. he's got a book coming out on the natural law. This is what we created for them to follow. This is a closed system right here. Okay, but they went and they did all this to try to suck us up into this. Because taxes are for them. Impost and excise are for them on their federal lands. That's why they were given specific lands set aside just for them. And I have a map somewhere around here. I'll have to show it some other time. So they have this closed system. It's just for them. In the city that they created, Washington, D.C., or the various military reservations, okay? They have an oath. They make laws, inter se, for themselves, for their members, that has to conform to the natural law, and we remain free and at liberty because of it. Now, free is sort of like anarchy. If you say I'm free, you're saying you're an anarchy. You can be an anarchy, but we prefer to be at liberty because we all agree, hopefully, that we injure no man and we use no force against another unless he's injuring a man. And when I say man, of course, I mean all people. Okay, so the positive laws are for them because they have an oath, and they have to conform to the Constitution. So when they say it's not in the Constitution, that means we can do it because the Constitution doesn't say we can't, then they're not talking about positive laws because positive law requires that it conform to the Constitution. Now, the Constitution is like an order. It's like a command. It's a duty. You have to follow it. If you don't follow it, it can't be a positive law. So when they say it's not in the Constitution, we can do it, they're talking about this over here. Those laws that they make that don't conform to the Constitution are over here. The ones that do conform to the Constitution are made positive. This is positive law. This is like from the beginning of systems of government. The system of government is a command from the people to the state and from the state to the federals. Okay? So when your state is not forcing the federals, when your state is allowing the federals to steal votes or to force vaccinations or to force taxes, they have lost their sovereignty because they're not following the commands of the one people. Because we have a constitution, and I'm not talking about the constitution that they created, that they, whether it's the same one or not, and they're misapplying it, misinterpreting it. I'm talking about the real Constitution, the one that we want them to follow and how we interpret it. That's where the sovereignty is given to them. If they don't follow it, they're not following their command. If they're not following their command, or let's call it military orders, if the commander-in-chief, which is the president, tells a general, go do this, here's your orders, is he going to say, I can do everything not on this paper? No. He'll end up in prison, in the military prison. He can only do what's on the order. Okay? Whether you call it a constitution, a contract, a charter, whatever you want to call it, it's a command from the sovereign, which is a positive law. It's a command made a law over here. Complies with this. This Constitution has to comply with this, and when it does, it's a positive law. When it doesn't, it's over here. Tyranny, improper, fictional jurisdiction, not positive, arbitrary jurisdictions. Jurisdiction with a lowercase j, not an uppercase j. Uppercase j is here because it's explicitly laid out what the powers are, okay? If you look to the Constitution, They've always this is a Heritage Foundation. Okay, it's accurate as far as I can tell to the original. Okay, so if you go look at the original handwritten and you look here, all of the capitalizations are accurate and the spellings are accurate because it calls it defense with a C in the preamble. Okay, defense with a C, it's circled right there. Okay, now all legislative powers are capitalized. What does that mean? That means that it's specific. It's a capital J for jurisdiction. It's not a fictional jurisdiction. It's explicit. It's written down. There it is. That's what you can do. This is your order. This is what the positive law says. It's a command from the sovereign. A positive law is a command from the sovereign. So the Constitution comes from the states, and the states come from the people. So one people created a state, gave it a little bit of sovereignty. The states created the Constitution, the federal government. The federal government is created by those people of the states, the one people, and they are the Congress, the president, and the judiciary departments. And they make laws, they make legislation, which are rules and regulations that conform to the law. And when they do all those things, it's called positive. But when they act outside of it, non-positive, they may cause an injury, which goes against this. It requires consent because it's asking to violate your natural rights, your natural law, the ones God gave you. When they make a non-positive law and they say, well, you sign this, they're asking you to give up these. And it's created by man, like a group of men or one man. Like the Congress members submit a law that's not positive, then it's a creation of man. It's not a creation of God. It's not like the Constitution that conforms to the natural law where we agree. It requires individual consent. It comes from man arbitrarily forced or appearing by authority or appearing to come from a sovereign but has no authority. So if you go to a website called Office of the Law Revision Council, you can just Google OLRC and you'll come to a whole list of all the titles. Okay? Now these titles have an asterisk next to them if they're positive. If they have no asterisks, they're not positive, meaning it's not a law. It requires consent. They're usually for business purposes or for generating revenue. They try to get you to sign it or show up in court or do a thing. It's for legal persons. It's created by those people in Congress without authority. They're not doing it in accordance with the Constitution. That's why they have no positive law citation on those laws, or I should say those titles. That's why they don't have an asterisk, because they're not conforming to the Constitution. They're outside the Constitution. And people like Nancy Pelosi says, well, the Constitution doesn't say we can't do it, but the Constitution is a command. It's a positive law. It's gives the right to legislate, but not to do arbitrary things, not to do whatever you want, just what's in here. Okay, each society has its own system of laws, and all the systems so far as they are known constitute the appropriate subject matter of jurisprudence. Okay, so let's see, he talks about whoever wrote this. Its aim is to show how a given rule came to be what it is, the legislative source, the emanation of the rule from a sovereign authority, the people, then the state, then the feds, which is Congress. Does it come from Congress, the Constitutional Congress, or a different Congress? Most of what they do that we don't like comes from over here. Okay? This is where they say no one is bound to follow an unconstitutional law. All unconstitutional laws are void upon inception. The minute you think about it, it's already void. Okay? Because you can't be in office and act outside your authority, because you turn off your power to do it. When they do it, they turned off their power to do it. Okay, people say the Constitution has been suspended. Sometimes they say that, and there's no such thing as a suspended Constitution, because anything you do under a suspended Constitution is void. So then the Constitution turns back on. Then you act outside of it, saying it's turned off. Then it's turned back on, because the minute you do something, you're doing it under the constitutional powers. But then when you do something outside of it, you're leaving your constitutional office. You're not under oath anymore. So they are slowly trying to change this into this. And we're at the point to where they've done so much of it, and you can't even see this anymore. You can't even tell what's constitutional anymore. So you go to that website, OLRC, and it shows you which titles have been made positive. And if you click on the Title 1, Chapter 3, Section 204A, it's like the last or second to the last sentence. Only the positive laws can be used as evidence in any court of the United States. That means they're creating different courts when they bring you in under a non-positive law, under a fictional jurisdiction, because they can't bring you into constitutional courts if they're using a non-positive law, which is tyrannical, improper, immoral, goes against the law, capital L law, and they're treating you as a legal person, which you're not, and they have no authority to do it. So they create a whole new system, a whole new court system where the judges don't even have oaths. Okay? Let's see, there's something really good in here. Let's see, it means an investigation of laws which exist or have existed in some given, the science of law means an investigation of laws which exist or have existed in some given society in fact. So they use these words like absolute, in fact, truth, real, fiction, and they all kind of mean something a little different, and then it can vary depending on who's writing. Austin, Bentham, Koch, Story, various other legal jurists or philosophers. Okay, so in other words, positive laws. And it means an examination not limited to the exposition of a particular system. Austin's first position is to distinguish between laws properly so called and laws improperly so called. Laws proper and laws improper. Okay? Positive law is proper, improper is non-positive law. Okay? Rules of action dictated by some superior being. So we're dictated by God. We create the one people, or we comprise ourselves of the one people. We create a state. The states then had our consent to create a federal government. The federal government created a Congress, and they all have an oath, and they are allowed to make positive laws for themselves, inter se, and everything they do over here is maybe legalized, but unlawful. Okay, this is de facto. This is de jure. This is de facto, the political system. Okay, de jure is us from the bottom up. De facto is we appointed the states and the states appointed the feds. So they are de facto because they are in fact in charge of themselves though. And the states are de facto also. The jure are the one people. Now if you go over here and you're if you were a congressperson, you would say you are de jure, we the people, a legal person, a member, inter se, making laws to run the government for yourselves for the benefit of these people, one people, the natural people. Okay. Let's see. The elimination of laws properly and improperly so called, which are not positive laws, brings us to the definition of positive law, which is the keystone of the system. Every positive law is set by a sovereign person or sovereign body of persons to a member or members of the independent member or members. We, the people, are the members of the government, the federal government, having an oath set by the sovereign, which was the states that were created by the one people. And this is according to Upshur. He's got a really good book out on the commentaries of Justice Story. So the person or sovereign body of persons to a member or members of an independent political society wherein that person or body is sovereign or superior. So we've created a state which created a federal government. Now in this system, the sovereign is the Congress people because they are the legislators. They're not sovereign over us, they're sovereign over themselves, they're sovereign over the government because now the president is sovereign over the law because he's supposed to make sure that the law is faithfully executed. And then the judicial department is sovereign over the interpretation of the law. They're not sovereign over us. They are not our leaders. They are our servants. Okay? We need to stop calling them leaders. They're not leaders. They are our protectors. They're supposed to protect our liberty. They're serving us. They're like our military. Though possibly sprung directly from another source, it is a positive law by the institution of that present sovereign in the character of a political superior. So you got to go back to also kings and queens. This applied to kings and queens and the Pope and bishops, and each was sovereign in his own position. Okay, so the legislator is he, not by whose authority the law was first made, but by whose authority the law continues to be, or whose authority it continues to be law. So I believe what it's saying there is that if we continue to allow this system, then they continue to make the laws. But once you withdraw your authority, they have no authority to continue to legislate. Okay, so I want to bring up a point here too. It says, as Austin expresses in the language of formal logic. Okay, so when we're talking about formal logic, we're talking about a different type of grammar system. So I don't have my book here, but I have a book on symbolic logic. And what they do is they can assign a symbol to each word in a sentence. And then each sentence has a logic to it. So if it's got double negative, the negatives cancel out, and then it becomes a positive statement. And if you look at the Constitution, they have a couple double negative and triple negative situations in there. So when you're talking about just us over here trying to read the laws, and a lot of times they don't make sense because they're not writing them in regular grammar, they're writing them in logic, in formal logic. Okay, so that's important to remember. A lot of people have told me, well, I read it and I've read it 10 times and I don't know what it's saying, because they wrote it in formal logic, which is what we call legalese. Okay, so each of the three terms signifies the same notion, but each denotes a different part of that notion and connotes the residue. That's duty, sanction, command. Those are the three terms he's talking about. So the three terms command, duty, and sanction are thus inseparably connected. As Austin expresses in the language of formal logic, each of the three terms signifies the same notion, but each denotes a different part of that notion and connotes the residue. So the Constitution is a command upon this body of people. They can't act outside of it. And when they pass laws, they have to be positive. They have to be to achieve a political purpose. They can't be arbitrary. They can't just make laws and say, oh, we're just making laws and we're just going to do this and that and we're going to have a fund where we can, tax people to give us money to go get our hair done and have our kids babysat while we're in Congress for 16 hours and have a gift shop and give money to the fish in India and give to Israel. They're not supposed to do that. It's supposed to have a political purpose. It's supposed to achieve a means to an end, and it's supposed to be for our benefit, not for the benefit of some other country. Okay? Austin holds superiority and inferiority to be necessarily implied in commands, and such statements as that laws emanate from superiors. So the Constitution has, it doesn't mention something called an enacting clause, which is really important. But in, I think it was 1945, they codified the enacting clause that they had been using since, I believe, the Continental Congress, or just after the Continental Congress in the Articles of Confederation. So the enacting clause is something like, we, the people of the United States of America and the House of Representatives and the House of Senate, whatever it says, that's the enacting clause. The enacting clause is required, not required, but was issued from a sovereign to a inferior, or a superior to an inferior, or a sovereign to a subject. So as a commander-in-chief, the president is superior to his officers, so he would issue a command to them. As the executive officer of the United States of America, he's in command of the states, not the people of the states, but the legislators of the states. So he can tell them, look, this is what we're going to do. The Congress is supposed to pass laws in accordance with the Constitution, making them positive for a political purpose, achieving a means to an end, which was like how the judiciary is going to run out, play itself, like the Judiciary Act. Okay, 1798 or whatever it was. That's the kind of laws they're supposed to make. The flag, the stuff about the flag, all that's positive law. Title 26 for IRS is not a positive law. Crime enforcement and criminal behavior and law enforcement on the federal side is not positive law. It's just arbitrary. Okay, it's not made positive. Law enforcement is not made positive. That guy that killed that woman, he was acting without authority. He shot that woman without authority because law enforcement is not enacted into positive law. But he's not going to go to prison. He's not going to be charged with murder. Okay? That's what we're talking about here. They're void from inception. The minute they thought about it, it was already no good because it was outside the Constitution. Okay, positive laws. Austin accordingly proceeds to distinguish positive from other true laws, which are neither laws set by God to men or laws set by men to men, not, however, as political superiors, nor in pursuance of a legal right. So even if the positive law conforms to the Constitution and the natural law, if they're not doing it as a political superior, then it's not a law. Okay? It creates no legal right. So you notice when the president writes an executive order, it doesn't create a benefit or a right, because the executive orders are not laws, they're orders, and orders are only for the military. You can only order a military person. Okay? Now, in my opinion, originally Congress was supposed to be members of the military, but that's another, I already talked about that in another video. Okay, because the Constitution is a command upon this body politic, a command, an order. Okay, and then the president can order them. The president can order the military. All right. Men are living in a state of nature or a state of anarchy when they are not living in a state of government or as members of a political society. Okay, so we create our own society. We created the state. Now, the state that we have now is not the state that we're supposed to be living in. I'm going to read this to you. This will be the last thing I say because this is already almost an hour long. So this is from a very old 1600s common law dictionary. You see it's in print. It's printed from the printing machine, but it's dated from the 1600s. Okay, now some of the books that I have are handwritten in calligraphy. Those are really hard to read. But I want to show you something on here where it talks about state. Okay, so somebody had asked me a long time ago why I thought that Hillary and Bill Clinton don't pay property taxes. And there's two answers that I have. Either one, their property is in a trust, so they don't actually own it. Or two, because they live in a hamlet and not a city. And there's a difference between these hamlets, burgs, shires. There's a difference between them. They're not called these things just because they're either a village or on a mountaintop. They're called these different things because they're under a different political system. They're a different community, and all communities seem to be run different from each other. So what it says here is it's given me the general definition of what a city is, which is basically what I told you. But then down here it says that the courts caused an error in pleadings, or in some cases by styling the burg or whatever it was, styling it be, I think this says cathedral, for what was actually a hamlet or a burg. Okay, so then the court had jurisdiction because they wrote it different, because the courts accepted something that was an error. So they were creating a fictional jurisdiction and a fictional court so that they could get control of something that really they didn't have control over. And that's what this system is doing with our states, because it requires in these fake courts with a fictional jurisdiction to write out your name in all capital letters, or to write state of Texas or state of Oklahoma in all capital letters. And we're not part of state of anything. We're just in Texas, Oklahoma, Virginia. We're in these places. When you talk about state of something, you're talking about something that's been legalized for a contract purpose to supply services to the military areas. And I've talked about that in another video also. So we're at almost an hour, and I think that's long enough. So I hope you got something out of this video. If you learned a little something, that's great. Maybe you can pass it along, share it with friends, because I think everybody needs to understand some of this stuff so that we can know who we really are. Stay safe.